Now we are coming to the panel session with the topic about policy and strategy to enhance infrastructure development and financial inclusion. The discussion chair of this panel is the Chief Economist of IDB Group, Professor Safas Alpay. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Safas Alpay.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to welcome you all to the panel session of this important forum on Sukuk for infrastructure development. And without further delay, I would like to kindly invite our distinguished panelists, Professor Suhasil Nazara and Mr. Sarjito and Dr. Walid Abdul Wahab to the podium to start our panel session. Please. So the way we will implement this panel session will be, I will be giving the floor for our distinguished panelists for around 7 to 10 minutes for their initial remarks. And then I will be asking them 1 or 2 questions, and then I will open the floor for questions and answer session. So our first panelist and speaker, Professor Suhasil Nazara. He got his bachelor degree from Faculty of Economics, University of Indonesia, and then he got his master's degree from Cornell University and the PhD degree from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And since February 2015, he is the chairman of Fiscal Policy Agency, Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, and he is also a professor of economics at the Faculty of Economics of the University of Indonesia, where he is also lecturing. Professor Nazara, please, the floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, in the next 10 minutes, I would like to give you a highlight about the background of our important seminar session this morning. That is, of course, this is about the infrastructure development and then how Sukuk would be very good for infrastructure development and financial inclusion. The way we organize this session throughout the day is that I'm going to present you the infrastructure needs of Indonesia, fiscal policy, and then later my colleague from the Director General of Risk Management and Financing will present you about how Sukuk is actually used, how the Sukuk financing is actually practically used in our fiscal policy. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's very fair to say that in this current government, the government of Indonesia starting this administration come up with with a completely different mindsets about how the fiscal policy should be managed. One of the most important element is that in our budget, the way how we handle the government's money, we understand that it is very important that the government spend enough money for infrastructure development. I think my colleagues, my fellow Indonesians understands very well that we are lacking of the infrastructure in Indonesia. We don't have enough infrastructure. So the current government started last year, thought that we have to build infrastructure. But the question is, where should the money come from? Where should we get the money to build our infrastructure in the country? Of course, we also have one other problem in Indonesia, that is we spend too much on the fuel subsidy in the past. We spend too much on the unproductive spending like fuel subsidy, and this current government decided that it's enough. It is time for us to straighten up our mind, let's cut down the fuel subsidy and increase the infrastructure spending. So that is what is happening. That is what is happening with Indonesian fiscal policy in 2015. You will see that also in the 2016. You will see that again and again in the 2017 and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, let me go to the slide number 10, which is going to show you, right one after this, yes, which is showing you the red line on the top is our education spending, Indonesian education spending. And by law, Indonesian education spending must be at least 20% of the budget. That is in our constitution. 20% of Indonesian budget must be spent on education. Then the line below that, the green line, is our energy subsidy. So you see there is a big drop in our energy subsidy, which is fuel subsidy, premium subsidy, gasoline, that they decided by the government 2015, cut them down and then stay low. And then we switch the money to the infrastructure spending, which is the green line in the middle. So you see the spike up going, the increase of that line, and the healthcare is on the way below. It is 5% of our budget. Ladies and gentlemen, the need for infrastructure development in Indonesia is quite massive. Indonesia is an archipelago country. The next slide actually gives you the list of infrastructure development on the plan for 2015 and 2019 until 2019, and altogether, I can tell you that we need not less than 5,000 trillion Indonesian rupiah, or more than 400 billion US dollar for all of them. Not to mention the maintenance. It's a huge amount of money that we need, and then it is quite fair to say that the state budget will only can cover about 130 billion US dollar. So we have to find the remaining from non-government. We have to find the remaining from the non-government, and it is quite, and we have several logic to that. Number one is the capital spending to state-owned enterprise, which will be leveraged. So the main difference, so you see, government can spend money to line ministries, government can also spend money for capital spending to the state-owned enterprise. The main difference between the two is that the money that we spend on the line ministry cannot be leveraged. If we spend 1 million rupiah, that will become a project worth of 1 million rupiah. But if we spend money as a capital spending to the state-owned enterprise, we spend 1 million, we expect that 1 million will become 4 million, 5 million worth of project financing by way of leveraging. The other thing is the private sector. So state-owned enterprise, number two is the private sector. Private sector by way of the public-private partnership and by way of the pure private infrastructure development is developed now in Indonesia. Public-private partnership is still at the very initial stage, but the pure private we are still inviting. And for the pure private, we are providing the fiscal incentives for any private sector building infrastructure worth more than 1 trillion rupiah. So we can provide the fiscal incentive in the form of the tax deduction to the private sector. So ladies and gentlemen, the need of infrastructure development is massive, and of course, sukuk financing is one way to fulfill that need, to fulfill the need. And we have been doing that, and I think so far the outstanding sukuk is at 9.5 billion US dollar for Indonesia, and later my colleague in the next session can elaborate to you in more fully about our sukuk portfolio as well as its management. Let me use the next couple of minutes to talk to you about one other thing. In Indonesia, when we changed the logic of the fiscal policy, when we said that reduce the fuel subsidy and increase the infrastructure, it is actually not only stopped there. The money that we get from the fuel subsidy reduction is actually allocated to two things. Number one is the infrastructure spending, and there is a number two, social protection. Because we believe that in the growing Indonesia, where the middle income class is increasing, social protection will become more and more important. Social protection is very, very important not only for the poor, but also for the middle class. Because this middle class are usually still vulnerable. Yes, they are way above the poverty line, but they are still exposed to many risks. So that's why social protection is very important. And of course, before we go to the social protection, let me go to directly to the different financial inclusion. We would like to deliver our social protection by way of the financial inclusion. So the government has already designed several government to private payment program, G2P program, by way of the financial inclusion. So some of my fellow Indonesians probably know this, the cash transfer program. Indonesia currently has the conditional cash transfer program to cover about 5.5 million households, which is the lowest household in Indonesia, about 5.5 million. And about this, for this 5.5 million, at this moment it is still paid by cash, but then the direction is to pay them by bank, by non-cash. Last year we started with 1 million family. 1 million family receiving their cash transfer by way of the banking sector, by way of the financial inclusion, financial service. In addition to that, there is also cash transfer to poor students, and this is completely now by bank. And the other thing is that they are still on the pipeline of what we call the welfare family saving programs, which is a program that is the last time used to compensate the increase of the fuel prices back in November 2014. So we paid those family, 1 million of them, with the banking by way of the mobile banking and electronic cash. Ladies and gentlemen, the improvement of infrastructure and financial inclusion are really two most important agenda of this current government. And for that, it is we are looking forward for the use of financing, good financing from different sources. And I hope that this can give you the highlight about the Indonesian economic policy and also what we are looking at for the financial reform in our budget. So let me stop here. I'm happy to elaborate further in the discussion later. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Nazara, for this concise introduction on the recent developments on infrastructure spending and investment in Indonesia. So now I'd like to invite Mr. Sarjito. Mr. Sarjito is currently Deputy Commissioner for Capital Markets Supervision in Indonesia Financial Service Authority, OJK. He got his undergraduate degree in law from University of Indonesia, and he has also an MBA degree in finance from St. Louis University, USA. He lectures capital market and enforcement for police officers, public prosecutors, judges, corruption and commission lawyers, and others. So please, Mr. Sarjito, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It's a great opportunity to be here to talk about sukuk for infrastructure. It is very tough actually I'm talking about corporate sukuk because many views that infrastructure basically belong to the government. And I recall what the professor just said before. Actually, sukuk is a bit complicated for private sector to finance infrastructure. But anyway, I would like to give the portrait of the corporate sukuk in Indonesia and also what actually we are expecting. And also we expect here to the Minister of Finance and also to the society. This is actually the milestones for the corporate sukuk. I'm sorry for the first, not 2012, but actually 2002. Increasing the 2002 is actually the first sukuk issuance, Mudarabah. It was issued by Indosat, a telecommunication company. And in 2003 and 2004, basically we had a fatwa regarding guidance for Islamic principle implementation in capital market and fatwa regarding ijara Islamic bonds. In 2006 and 2007, there was the era that we issued rule regarding the issuance of Islamic securities and also rule regarding akad used in issuance of Islamic securities and a fatwa regarding convertible mudarabah Islamic bonds. 2008 and 2009, there was a law number 9, 2008, regarding Islamic government securities. And the first government sukuk issuance was at that period. And then also first government retail sukuk issuance. 2014 and 2015, it was a very important time because we announced 2015 as the year of the Sharia capital market. We also launched a Sharia capital market roadmap, logo and tagline. Launching of the OJK, the Indonesian FSA regulation on Islamic securities. This is a bit of statistic of corporate sukuk in Indonesia currently. Now we had 2,090 million US dollar mudarabah akad. And we also have 290 and then 428 million US dollar in ijara akad. And the total outstanding in value is 718 million US dollar. If compared between sukuk and corporate bond, we could see from the pictures that the outstanding sukuk from 2011 till 4th of May 2016, we could see that, take the last example, is that 4th May 2016, the sukuk outstanding is only 0.72, while outstanding bonds was 19.64. So actually the proportion between sukuk and corporate bond is still below 5%, which is in Indonesia, we very famous for 5% trap, which is only 3.68%. We could see also a bit flash on the outstanding corporate sukuk by industry, that the most would be actually consumer goods, and then finance, industry, infrastructure, utility, transportation, mining, property, real estate, and construction. Let's go to the prospect and challenge in sukuk development. Next slide, please. Okay. We could see here Indonesia infrastructure financing needs for 2015 and 2019. We could see transportation, electricity, energy, oil and gas, information technology and telecommunication, and public base. I'm not going to read the numbers, but you could see there from the screen. Why then Sukuk is very important? And because it has prospects, certainly. As we aware of that, in the week of Chinese economy and also European economy, Indonesia economy experienced still around 60% annual growth rate. And in 2013 and 2015, middle income people increased significantly. It was from 37% to 70% of the population. This is a huge jump. And this is also very important, and I hope there is also a representative from the state-owned enterprises and also the Ministry of Finance of the shareholders, which is we have quite huge number of state-owned enterprises. It's around 119, and the subsidiaries are around 600 companies. And financing needs for infrastructure development is actually government need 47%, private 33%, and state-owned enterprises 20%. And this is very important for momentum for development, which is now even the President Jokowi himself, actually as the chair of the National Committee on Sharia financing, which is increased government support in Islamic economy, and also the trend of positive growth in Islamic finance and low utility rate of capital market products. And this is a bit sad story of our society and our capital market. And you could see from the screen that the situation, it was back in 2013 actually, the survey was conducted, and now the Indonesian FSA is still conducting for the new survey to compare with this survey, whether there was a jump or a huge increase or not. But I believe it's going to be a quite huge jump. As you understand, we take a look on the capital market, which is Sukuk is one of the products. Those who are well literate is only 3.79%, and sufficiently literate only 2.4%, and less literate 0.03%, and not literate it was 93.79%. It was huge percentage of our population that actually not literate. Capital market. I believe the bank, Indonesian FSA is very aggressive in doing an education, dissemination of information, and even we also force the curriculum from the beginning of their life at school, like from primary school, junior high, and high school, and even at university. And we also go to a lot of campuses all over Indonesia to educate not only the student but also the lecturers, and disseminating of the information about Sharia capital market and also capital market as in common. Why then, what is actually the challenges? Challenges are lack of understanding. This is very important that very few market players actually understand well about concept of Sukuk. If you don't understand, so how can you recognize and you're going to use this? And most investors, especially individual investors, are not familiar with the Sukuk. So they don't care whether, even if those are Muslim, even the fanatic one, they don't know what is different between Sukuk and bond. So this is very important for us to educate our society on Sukuk and on every aspect of financial instrument. And then what about the market players' perception? On their perception, issuing Sukuk needs extra effort and cost. And they think that Sukuk is more costly than issuing bond and other instrument. And they also perceive that sukuk only can be issued by Sharia-compliant companies. We also still facing legal issues. Even our brother from Ministry of Finance, that actually it was quite clear, but some lawyers and also some investors and market participants still ask. Market players doubt about taxation policy due to no explicit regulation about tax neutrality for sukuk, even though in practice sukuk is not charged double taxes. So we need clarity only. So sometimes rule and laws need to be clarified and clear and read by the same person with the same meaning. And we also face liquidity issues. Sukuk in secondary market, still as you understand, the comparison between sukuk and bond is still very low, less than 5%. So certainly the liquidity is a big issue. And investors tend to hold to maturity, and no sukuk market makers. That we are going to push these market makers in the near future. And certainly it's very rational that central bank is willing to buy only sukuk repo issued by the government. And let's move to upcoming initiative. What we are going to do with this situation, illiquid market, secondary market, and still low of issuance, less than 5% compared with the bond. Even bond itself is still low. Now we have a pipeline in OJK for the issuance of sukuk with two companies at around 1.5 trillion rupiah. But to cope with the market infrastructure, we really encourage to have a sukuk market maker. And then we also need to have, the mercy also from the Minister of Finance that we want to develop a sukuk-based Sharia mutual fund. And we also develop a Sharia repurchase agreement and Sharia hedging. And then what incentive do we need? OJK now, the Indonesian FSA, has already give a different levy for the issue of the sukuk. As you could see from the screen, if you issue sukuk, registration fee is only 0.05% of issuance value and maximum of the 150 million Indonesian rupiah. And if you issue bond, the issuance value and maximum of 750 million. So we actually, because as an infant industry, sukuk need to have an incentive. We also strongly and very aggressive in promoting in education, and also we invite also state-owned companies that we have them to issue sukuk, and also with the help of Ministry of Finance and of Ministry of State-owned Enterprises, we want that those who are relevant to infrastructure, the state-owned companies, they can issue sukuk. And as we understand that a number of sukuk infrastructure state-owned enterprises now is around 53 among 600. And we also increase the capacity building for market players involved in issuing sukuk, which is issuer, underwriter, and the trustee. What strong government support that we need? We also want to have a clarity from the Directorate General of Taxes. We need to have specific laws or amendments are urgently needed to make tax uncertainties crystal clear to sukuk issuers. And Directorate General of Budget and Financing and Risk Management, we want to have create special regulation that will allow investment managers to invest in sovereign sukuk for sukuk-based Islamic mutual fund. Because if they battle in the secondary market, so it's very tough. So they want to have, if possible, in the primary market. This is also part of the promotion. And for the Ministry of State-owned Enterprises, we need to have a top-down policy approach to encourage state-owned enterprises to issue sukuk. How about the demand side? We need to enlarge investor base by encouraging institutional individual investors to invest in Sukuk. In many opportunities where we go to big cities in Indonesia and also to universities, even the question from the journalists, also they don't really understand about Sukuk and other Islamic or Sharia instrument. So we really encourage the workshop for institutional investors and public lecturing to universities, as we did a couple of times, and we will do again. And seminar for high school students, journalists, and other communities. And also, we also put, in curriculum. And we also want to have a broader access of investment for public in rural area. I think those are some of the portrait of corporate Sukuk in Indonesia. And I hope this opportunity really drive us to understand more about Sukuk and also drive the state-owned enterprises, those who deal with the infrastructure, to issue Sukuk. And this is the duty of the Indonesian FSA to provide the easiness of issuing Sukuk. And also we really hope the incentive from the government, which is Minister of Finance, that we can have a tax incentive, because in other jurisdictions like in Malaysia, even in London, basically the growth of Sukuk really pushed because of the tax incentive. And I hope this will be a great discussion among of you, and thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Sarjito, for the presentation on what you are doing in capital markets for promoting Sukuk in Indonesia. And now I would like to invite Dr. Walid Abdul Wahab. Dr. Abdul Wahab joined Islamic Development Bank in 1998 and currently is the Director of Infrastructure Department, where he looks after transport, water, energy, and ICT sectors in our member countries. Dr. Walid got his PhD degree from Canada, British Columbia. Yes, sorry. And he worked as Assistant Professor of Civil Engineering in Canada and Jordan before joining IDB. Please, Dr. Walid. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
I come from IDB, and as all of you know, IDB stands for Islamic Development Bank, but it can very well also stand for Infrastructure Development Bank. And you will not even have to change the acronym, you can still use IDB. In fact, recently, as you know, the MDB Communities was joined by a new bank, which is called Infrastructure Bank, which is the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank in China. But IDB is all about financing infrastructure. And maybe this calls for a definition of what we mean by infrastructure. Now, everything about development landscape now the whole story starts from SDGs. And unlike their predecessor, the MDGs, now we have infrastructure in the heart of the SDG agenda. You can see very clearly here that we have 6 of 17 indicators. Number 6, 7, 9, and 11 are clearly and squarely addressing physical economic infrastructure like water and energy. And we also have indicators 3 and 4 on what we call social infrastructure relating to education and health. And by the way, I was very pleased to see Indonesia spending more of their budget on education than on infrastructure, although I'm a director of infrastructure. And I think Indonesia is probably the only member country of IDB where our portfolio in education is larger than our portfolio in infrastructure, despite the heavy capital-intensive investment that are normally required for infrastructure. So this reference of infrastructure in the SDGs has made changes inside institutions that are financing development in the world, primarily the MDBs. In the past, we used to have a divide between what is poverty focused intervention and what is economic development intervention. So you will normally have social projects to tackle poverty, and you have infrastructure to boost economic growth and jobs. Now, the SDGs has rightly focused the attention on both. Is this working? Next slide, please. Okay. Now, I borrowed this slide from Standard & Poor's, and just to give you, because here I'm not coming to talk about Sukuk as per se, because there are other experts. By the way, one of the issues that you will notice here, this seminar, that Sukuk by itself is a very difficult subject. And infrastructure financing for investors, institutional investors, is a difficult subject. So the combination of the two, I think, goes a long way to explain why we have lack of financing in infrastructure. After the global financial crisis in 2008, banks, as the professor mentioned in his opening speech, are more reluctant to finance infrastructure, typically because they demand long tenors, and banks have to comply with more stringent capital requirements under Basel III and so on. So banks have either withdrew or significantly reduced their financing infrastructure. But despite this, you can see almost 2/3 of infrastructure financing comes from bank loans. Governments is about 10%, and multilateral agencies, including LDBs, a small tiny drop of 3%. And I want you to pay attention to the insurance and pension funds, which are the long-term institutional investors, as we refer to them. They have very small percentage of 10%. The sovereign wealth funds, which is normally grouped together in this, has almost insignificant something to mention in infrastructure. Now, this has all led to this reality. I hope this is not too complex for you. This is a slide that I made up, trying to depict to you the quantum of the problem. The infrastructure gap. Now, this is annual infrastructure gap. This is not the current investment in infrastructure. There is, of course, that's in the $4 to $5 trillion. The gap, which is the difference between what is being spent now and the needs, are 1.25 trillion. That's $1.25 trillion. And last month, the 9 multilateral development banks, they got together in Washington under what they call Global Infrastructure Forum. The 9 presidents of the MDBs, including the 2 new banks, the Asia Infrastructure Bank and the New Development Bank, or the BRICS banks, and they made a commitment for the next 3 years that they will scale up their financing of infrastructure. Of course, we know that all MDBs are stretched out. They can do only so much in terms of increasing their financing or lending rates. So I calculated the annual average for the next 3 years. It comes to 75 billion. So every year, MDBs will be investing 75 billion in infrastructure. And you can see this is only a small drop. This is 6% of the current gap. Now, if you look at the gap, the difference, which is 1.1 trillion, which looks a very big, mind-boggling number, it's actually only 2.4% of the assets under management by the pension funds, investment funds, and the sovereign wealth funds. And if you ask about what is the current exposure of those infrastructure portfolio and the asset class of these funds, it's only 0.8%. So in theory, if we are only able to increase their exposure to infrastructure asset class by 1.6%, that will fill the gap. But we know that this is not in theory, of course, and it's very difficult to achieve. I think now to link this picture, which is very grim, with the realities, it's very clear that Sukuk as a source, an alternative source of financing to infrastructure. So beyond the banks, which is the bulk, about 2/3, you have the multilateral banks, you have the governments, you have the long-term institutional investors, and then you have the Sukuk market. Unfortunately, in our member country, as this slide, which I borrowed from one of our colleagues in the bank, shows is underutilization of Sukuk for the purpose of infrastructure. I mean, as we heard from the professor, the term Sukuk is widely used, but there are so many variants and types of Sukuk. By the way, everything we finance in IDB is coming from Sukuk because we issue our own Sukuk, IDB Sukuk, which is corporate Sukuk, and we use those money to invest back in infrastructure. So in a way, you can say that all our financing in Sukuk. But what we mean here is actually project-specific Sukuk, which is an alternative source of financing. You can see that the 2/3 of the exposure for the last since up to 2011. I'm sorry, this is not very up to date, is actually in Malaysia. And the GCC countries and Indonesia, and even Turkey is not on the map in terms of exposure to Project Sukuk, is insignificant. And this is my last slide, which depicts the state of Islamic infrastructure development in our 56-member country. You can see, as expected, there is, of course, Malaysia and the Gulf countries have relatively developed infrastructure, Islamic infrastructure. Some countries have partial infrastructure, Islamic finance, but the bulk of our countries in Central Asia, in Africa, and Latin America have practically no infrastructure, Islamic infrastructure development. And I think the slide depicted earlier in Indonesia about financial survey literacy also collaborate that people are almost illiterate when it comes to capital markets and how can capital markets play a role in infrastructure financing. So these are my introductory remarks, and I will look forward for discussion further on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let me check the time. Okay, we have enough time for questions and answers. So I would like to thank our panelists for their introductory remarks. So before coming back to you for your questions, let me ask one question for each panelist from my side, and then we continue with our audience questions. Of course, infrastructure, as mentioned by Dr. Walid, will be playing a key role, especially in this new ambitious global sustainable development agenda. It's a cross-cutting team, and it has a lot of positive externalities with many of the goals included in this new agenda. And on another platform, G20, for example, Indonesia is a member of G20, so infrastructure investment is one of the key areas where G20 is focusing through its working groups. And recently, global infrastructure hub has been established by this process. So, Professor Nazara, would you like to maybe indicate the expectations of Indonesia from this new global infrastructure hub that has been recently established by G20, not only for G20 countries, but also for all other countries? So what are the expectations? I know that they have recently published a knowledge report on this issue as design of the infrastructure projects will be key to attract, especially the private sector in this financing side. So I would like to get your views and expectations and how we can make it more effective. Thank you. You came from here, yes.
Thank you, Safas. On the G20, I think Indonesia is pleased that we are leading one of the working group in the infrastructure, especially with the topic on the connectivity. So there are several other working groups, and then one other that I remember is the multilateral development bank financing, and we hope that this MDB financing will take a look at the Sukuk financing more and more as viable options for mobilizing financing for infrastructure development across in the world. Specifically on the connectivity, there is one very important point that Indonesia always brings to the connectivity in the infrastructure discussion under the G20. That is, I believe that when we talk about connectivity, and this is pretty much the case in Indonesia, people are started to think immediately about roads, about highway, about toll, about the sea lines, airports, seaports, airlines, and everything. Yes, of course, that is important. That kind of connectivity, the physical connectivity is very important, but we also would like to bring up the subject of the virtual connectivity. It is not the person and the goods, the people who are moving, but the information that are moving. So virtual connectivity, combating the digital divide in the world is very important as part of the connectivity issue and infrastructure that we have to build. So building up the infrastructure is not only about building roads, but also internet access, knowledge on the internet, and then all the virtual knowledge development is very important. This is one of our move in Indonesian financial inclusion is to get cash transfer by way of the cellular phone. And the people who are receiving the cash transfer can bring the cellular phones to the post office, and the post office will pay the money. So they don't have to line up in terms of the post office. They can go any time. They can use the financial services as a way for the cash transfer. This is part of the combating the digital divide. So infrastructure, when we are talking about the infrastructure, it's not only physical, it is also virtual infrastructure. This is the topic that we always bring to the G20 forum. Thank you, Sofas.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Nazara. Now I would like to move Mr. Sarjito now. As mentioned in both of your presentations, there's a huge infrastructure investment plans of the government in the next 4 or 5 years. And it seems that we have to expand the investor base to get the required financing. And you also mentioned in your presentation about retail sukuk that has been introduced by Indonesia. So can you kindly maybe give us a little more information about the retail sukuk perspectives and how you will be supporting this in the upcoming years? And also, the sukuk potential is largely unutilized as of now. And what are the specific plans that OJK have to make sukuk more attractive for the investors in Indonesia?
Okay, thank you. This is probably the first question fit to the next speakers. But I would like to answer for what is actually the expectation of the OJK to develop the corporate sukuk. At this opportunity, the authority of the OJK is on the corporate sukuk. Some of the activities that we have been doing are that we have to aggressively, I'm talking aggressively because we deal with the illiterate society in capital market, which is 97%, around that numbers, which is a huge duty for us to educate them. Because in a sense, we don't want actually when sukuk actually issued, then bought by foreign investors, corporate sukuk. We also hope that in general, like the equity market here in Indonesia, that we a bit not quite resilient with the perspective of the composition of the shareholders in our market, because 64% of the equity market now owned by foreign investors. That we do hope here, most Indonesian, those mainly a majority of Muslim society, that we become the investors, retail investors of not only government sukuk but also corporate sukuk. And by then, what we can do actually provide easiness of issuing sukuk, as I mentioned in my presentation before. And we cannot also, or JK cannot do on our own. We really rely on the government support, which is at this opportunity is very nice that we have our brother from Ministry of Finance. That tax incentive is very important, because other than that, it's very difficult to compete. Even for the bank, Sharia bank is also not quite competitive compared to the conventional bank. So to develop sukuk, other than educate our society on sukuk, Islamic instrument, what we call sukuk, but we also must provide liquidity in the secondary market and also make easiness for those who are potential insurers. And with respect to the today's topic on infrastructure, we do hope that Ministry of State of Owned Enterprises really push those who are around 53 of the companies who specialize on infrastructure, then later on issue corporate sukuk in capital market. And we hope that the liquidity is going to be much better, and we push to have a market maker and some other agenda that we have been doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarjito. Dr. Walid, Addis Ababa meeting, Financing for Development Conference, and adopted action agenda accordingly. Invited all the MDBs to establish this Global Infrastructure Forum, and the first meeting has been held in April in DC. So would you kindly inform us what are the outcomes of this forum? What kind of expectations now we have for the member countries? Because all MDBs participated to this forum, and they have made strong involvement in this process. So what are the outcomes for the member countries?
Well, thank you. Well, I think there is a document which is available on the website. It's a statement by the heads of the MDBs who participated in the Global Infrastructure Forum. It came as a direct response to the Addis call for action on financing the SDGs, and big part, as you saw, of the finding the financing resources for SDGs is for infrastructure. Now, this is also has been going on for a number of years. As you know, the MDBs have been gathering into forums. Now we have 9 of them. And the dialogue between that forum and the Forum of Governments, which is really the G20, has been going on intensively. I mean, Australia 2 years ago, Turkey last year, and now China. We have had 3 sustained years of focus on infrastructure. Infrastructure has been in the heart of the agenda of the G20, and they have been actually urging the MDBs to work together, as the professor mentioned. And there are a number of working groups. There is the MDB working group. There is the infrastructure investment working group. And we are being urged by the G20 to work together closely and to commit to more sustained infrastructure financing for the next 3 to 5 years. And those numbers that I shared with you, the $75 billion by the MDBs, is really coming as a result of those deliberation with the G20 and the United Nations on the SDGs.
Thank you. Now I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. Can you kindly raise your hands and briefly introduce yourself by your name and institution? So we have one question from here, and one sister here, and one here. Let's have 3 questions in the first round. Do we have microphones for? Yes. Let's start from here, and please microphone for brother there and our sister here. Yes, please.
Testing. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. My name is Freddy. I'd like to raise my question to my colleague, Mr. Sarjito. My question is about the plan of the Indonesian OJK to develop the ratings for the sukuk. I'd like to ask Mr. Sarjito to elaborate more about the program or the plan of OJK about this rating. Thank you.
Can you kindly repeat the question? Because
okay, let me try to make it slower. One of
maybe
the program.
Yeah. You just use this. Maybe it's better. Echo. Yeah.
Okay.
We can kindly.
Okay, thank you. One of the program that the Indonesian OJK is planning to do to develop the sukuk in Indonesia is to develop the ratings for this sukuk. So I would like to ask Mr. Sarjito to elaborate more about this. What the plan of OJK to develop the ratings for sukuk in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, next, please. Yes, please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rusdi from CIMB Niaga. This question to Pak Sarjito. We really understand regarding the role of OJK that there are some things which has been addressed by government, especially regarding the tax neutrality. My question is, who is going to take up this to the government? Because if there's no one in the structure, our structure, we are still hanging fruits. We do not know how to address. And then the second thing, does OJK has a plan to have the sukuk corporate law? If we see the historical, for example, when the government, they have the Islamic banking law, I think the business is growing. But when we talk to some investor, I think they're concerned regarding the sukuk corporate law. And then for the Pak Nazara from BKF, we read in the news that the government they are doing they plan to amend the undang-undang pajak penghasilan. Is it including for the Islamic finance transaction or not? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, can we have the last question for the first round? Can we have the microphone to the front, please?
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Iva Atka. I'm still a student in Institute of Statistics, studying economics and statistics. As we know that the price or the cost of infrastructure between the west of Indonesia, like Jakarta, Sumatra, and Extra, and between Jakarta and Sumatra, and the east of Indonesia, like Papua, Sulawesi, and Maluku, is different. And the cost of infrastructure in Papua is really higher from the west of Indonesia. I want to ask if there is the special force or the special program or policy of Indonesia using this sukuk to reduce the cost of infrastructure in Indonesia, especially in the east of Indonesia, like Papua, Sulawesi, and Maluku. Thank you.
Thank you. So I come back to our panelists. Yeah, Professor Nazara, first you, and then we have a question for Mr. Sarjito also. First,
thank you.
Professor
There is
Nazara.
one question about the revision of Indonesian income tax law, whether that will also include the sukuk. In the revision of the Indonesian income tax law, which we scheduled sometime, hopefully no later than next year, we need some time for all this discussion. We will revisit all dimensions of the income tax law in Indonesia. So I can tell you that the plan at this moment, it is not going to be like an amendment of the law, but it will be a complete overhaul of the law. So we hope that we will also include, so it is actually the answer is very simple. We will include all dimensions. So that is for sukuk, also for the government bonds as well. So we hope to get your feedbacks actually. What are the elements that you would like to see in the upcoming revisions? To address the next question about whether sukuk is possible to reduce costs in the infrastructure development, especially for our fellow Indonesians in the eastern region. at this moment, the government is using the sukuk as part of the general budget financing. So every year, last year, for example, we run budget deficits. Last year was 2.5% of the GDP. Now, in order to finance that budget deficit, we are going to different sources. We sell bonds to the market, in conventional market, as well as in sukuk market, in Islamic bonds market. In the Islamic bonds market, I can tell you that Indonesia is now one of the highest sovereign issuer, Republic of Indonesia. Next session will be more discussion about that. But then, what are the money is used for? The money is used for the budget. So it gets into the budget, and the budget is then spent on infrastructure. If we build enough infrastructure in the eastern region of Indonesia, then accordingly the cost of doing business in eastern region of Indonesia will also going down. So infrastructure will smoothening up the business, improve the investment climate, will be lower cost at the end of the day. So that is the link. So it is not something that is directly to reduce cost, but by using the sukuk financing, we can build more infrastructure than we are capable of. Out of the tax revenue, we are capable to build more infrastructure. If we build more infrastructure, it will be promoting investment climate and reducing cost of doing business in more remote area in Indonesia. I hope this explains to your question. Thank you.
Mr. Sarjito?
Okay, I think I have two very good questions from my brother Freddy Saragi on rating of the sukuk, and a second from my brother from the CIMB about the possibility of issuing corporate sukuk law and also who actually handled this tax a bit problem. But Freddy, actually, we currently still treat the same way between issuing bond and corporate sukuk. But actually, it is different thing, as our professor from Wharton School also mentioned before, that it must be different because rating for the sukuk is not the same as a rating for the corporate bond, normal corporate bond. And also the bankruptcy thing. For the rating now, we have been discussing with the Pavindo and Fitch on possibility of make a special rating for issuing sukuk, not like corporate bond. Because we understand that sukuk has an underlying asset, while corporate bond is not the same like the issuing sukuk. So OJK now still in deep discussion on doing these rating things, Mr. Freddy. I believe that later on we can find the good thing about this rating, even though in the international perspective, still the same for rating for the sukuk and corporate bond. And we believe that it must be different. For our brother from CIMB, on the tax clarity with the Minister of Finance, we have been discussing this with the Minister of Finance, and it's very fruitful discussion. And according to Ministry of Finance, it was only the perception, but actually it is the same. But again, as some lawyers, international lawyers and investors need to have clarity, but we want from the Ministry of Finance to issue not law, changing law, but implementing rules that can make it clear that this is actually treated as what we want. So we have been doing that. We also been discussing with the Minister of Finance and also from the Directorate of the Tax Office and even from other parties. So we are having a fruitful discussion. On the possibility of the issuing sukuk law, it is like in
other perspective, like Indonesia has currently don't have investment law. So we only rely on the capital market law. We don't have investment law. So growing on the Sharia instrument, so it is very possible that later on that we think if we really need that, so corporate sukuk law can be issued. So we do hope on the development of the Islamic finance and also Islamic instrument, so we can adjust the possibility of that issuing a sukuk law. We are discussing about that. Thank you. Thank you. So given the time limitation, I will have one last round of questions. One brother here and one brother here. Okay. Do I have the microphone? Please, to be concise, one question, because we don't have time. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Dr. Saeed from Libya. I had attended your for 2 days now, and I thank for IDB Bank for the invitation. I think as we're a little bit far away from home, we have enough investment and fund to finance and invest in any private or public project. But we are looking for a relationship, because this is sukuk, is something new for us, where I come from. We look for an asset management or a regulator through IDB or the professional of Indonesia to help us to regulate our funds, which is we have them all over the world. And we are looking to invest in a private, and we want to re-immigrant those funds that we have all over the world to come back to Islamic communities such as Indonesia, Malaysia. And our funds at the moment is being managed by, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, those big names. We need to re-regulate and re-immigrant funds back to the Islamic world. So we look for a professional Muslim brothers like Indonesia, IDB Bank, to look at this proposal. As my country at the moment is under state of war, but we are now rebuilding Libya, hopefully, inshallah, the end of this year. We are not looking for funds. We have enough funds, but we look for management. And also we want to reinvest those funds back to the Islamic world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Brother Walid, you can maybe comment on this. And next and last question from here. This side, we have microphone, please. Microphone? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My question, just quick. Mr. Freddy has explained before, has asked about ratings for Islamic sukuk. And I think before you can have ratings, we should also ask what is Indonesia's track record for the sukuk itself? Because if the track record is not good, then the ratings will automatically show. So do we have some report where we can look at how the sukuk is going? Because to say we have invested a lot in sukuk or we have issued a lot of sukuk just means I owe a lot of money now. But how am I doing in repaying those sukuk? Jazakumullah.
Thank you. So let's start with the first question. Dr. Walid, you can comment. And maybe second question, Professor Nazara.
Thank you very much. Question from Dr. Saeed from Libya. I think you will be pleased to know that IDB has four special departments that are specialized in addressing the kind of question that you raised. The first one, we have an Islamic Financial Services Department, which is mandated to develop the Islamic financial industry, and they will be more than happy to work with you. We have ERTI itself, of course, which is disseminating knowledge about Islamic finance products. We have the Capacity Development Department, which specializes in transferring knowledge and know-how between countries in a special field. So, for example, if you want to learn from Indonesia or Malaysia or any other country, they will be more than happy to assist in that. And when the time comes for the issuance itself, we have the private sector arm that does provide advisory services in issuance of sukuk. So these are the four key departments. Some of the directors and the Director General of ERTI is here. They can also provide more information for you after the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Nazara.
Thank you. The second question. I think your question is a good question that some of the answers would be in the next session. But I will address one point that you raised about the issuing sukuk means we owe a lot. Now, how much is a lot? Now, I can tell you that the Indonesian government debt to GDP ratio is currently 27%. 27% out of a GDP is not a lot. It is very manageable. If we look at our neighboring countries in the Southeast Asia, you will find other countries at 50, 60% debt to GDP ratio. If you look at Japan, 250% of the GDP. So 27% in a micro sense is very manageable. Now, of course, the need of Indonesia to build infrastructure is a lot. Now, in the past, when we borrow money from overseas, the bulk of that money is used for fuel subsidy. Now we cut down the fuel subsidy, the bulk of that money is used for infrastructure. So, I can tell you that if we use the money wisely, then debt to GDP ratio that is increasing a little bit which is still under management is okay. Our current law limit our debt to GDP ratio at 60%. Now, there is no intention of the government to go too high, to go up too high. We are still comfortable at around 27% of the GDP, and we would like to maintain around that numbers. Now, if we would like to maintain that numbers, the next question is, where should we get the financing from? From the market. It comprises conventional market and Islamic sukuk market, or we can also still making the best available of the loans. We have to manage that, and I think the next session, my colleague from the Ministry of Finance will tell you the government debt portfolio, how we manage that, and then more specifically, the management of the sukuk, the Islamic bonds. I hope that is also a good introduction for the next session as well.
Thank you, and this will be a good note that we can end this session as we have already exited our time. I would like you to join me to thanking our distinguished panelists.